The morning began like any other, but ended in the most peculiar way. 1, 2, 5. Newborn creatures were burrowed in a shadowy hollow underneath a waterlogged mattress. Craig McGettrick, part of a neighborhood cleanup crew, froze. He'd expected roaches, maybe rats, but this? He couldn't believe he was looking at puppies that seemed to have been born only yesterday. But there they were, 5 small, black-furred creatures curled together in a tight, breathing mound. Their eyes were tightly sealed, the skin around them dark, bluish and translucent. With each shallow, fluttering breath, their tiny ribs pressed against thin skin. They were utterly still, except for the occasional involuntary twitch, a leg jerking, a wee ear flicking. The air around them carried a faint stale scent that cut through with the damp, decaying odor of the mattress. They were so deeply vulnerable that Craig's breath caught in his chest. He knelt to look closer at the puppies, and a niggling doubt took root. Their snouts were pointier. Their tails seemed too long, almost the length of their tiny bodies. They were impossibly fragile, but something about them felt wild, unfamiliar. He couldn't put a finger on it. Maybe they're just a rare breed, Craig concluded. "Found something?" his friend Bessie called out. He didn't look at her, using his shoulder to keep the heavy mattress propped up and away from the hollow where the pups were burrowed. "Puppies, I think," he said, his voice unsure. He carefully lifted one. Its paws were oddly delicate, almost like little hands. He didn't think they looked older than a few days. Poor, odd-looking, abandoned puppies. The thought brought with it an ache that rose in his throat. Someone must have dumped them here, he reasoned, perhaps hoping the cleanup would lead to their rescue. Or maybe a stray mother had given birth in the shelter of the rubbish heap and had since vanished. Either way, they wouldn't last much longer. He already knew that the puppies needed help, and he was going to help them. Craig had no idea that this single act of kindness was about to throw him into the center of a minor internet firestorm, a race against nature itself, and a completely baffling realization. When Bessie reached him, she gasped softly, her gloved hand pressed against her chest. "Poor things," she murmured, kneeling beside him. The sight of them made her pout. "Any idea how they got here?" "Not a clue," he replied, pushing the mattress aside. "What do we do?" Bessie Wellham was a very close friend of his, a neighbor and also a fellow volunteer. She interned at the animal shelter for a short time. He was sure she would know what to do. "I think we should make sure they are warm first. This place is pretty damp," Bessie suggested, and Craig was already way ahead of her. His mind was already moving through the next steps. He found an old cardboard box near a pile of recyclables and yanked off his flannel shirt to line the bottom. The cotton was worn but soft. He hoped it would suffice. Bessie rummaged through her truck and returned with a scarf and an old towel, and together they made something that at least resembled a cradle. Craig could tell Bessie was still in shock, possibly even more than he was. She was usually quite the talker. The creatures squirmed faintly as Craig lifted them, one by one, into the box. Their bodies were a bit warmer now, but still worryingly weak. Their little paws twitched as they slept, and Craig could only wonder if they were at least having good dreams. Bessie found a half-full hot water bottle among the cleanup supplies and tucked it beside them. The pups instinctively gathered around it, pressing close to its heat. "Let's get them to the vet," Craig said quietly. "We'll ask around if anyone knows them later." His friend agreed, and soon they were climbing into her car and driving off. Thankfully, the cleaning exercise was almost over. The drive to the veterinary clinic was a blur. Craig held the box on his lap, the hum of the car blending with the faint mewling inside. He looked down at them before leaving the truck. Tiny black snouts, delicate tails, small ribs still fluttering with effort. They were helpless, but alive, even with how cold the hollow had been. He almost found it miraculous. He had never been a pet person, his only pet being a hamster when he was 5 years old. And the rodent had died in the strangest way, so he never bothered with taking care of animals. However, seeing these small things almost made him reconsider. Their looking so adorable and helpless was a huge bonus. The clinic door chimed as they entered. The vet on duty, a young doctor with tired eyes and gentle hands, took one look at the box and ushered them inside. Her staff gathered around, voices hushed, with some cooing at the puppies as they transferred the pups to a warm incubator lined with blankets. "They're newborns," she said after a moment. "They're barely a few days old, too. You got them here just in time." Craig exhaled, only then realizing how tightly he'd been holding his breath. He had also guessed their ages correctly. The vet explained how they'd need to warm up the puppies first and try to feed them when they seemed better. They would also be monitored in the clinic, at least throughout the night. It would be difficult, but not impossible. She assured him they'd do everything they could. Craig and Bessie left the clinic feeling equally as relieved. The little ones were safe, at least for now. That night, Craig uploaded the photos he'd taken, 5 tiny bodies huddled together, eyes shut, as they cuddled in the incubator. He had also taken some while they were in the makeshift cradle and under the mattress. He wrote a simple caption on Facebook. "Found these little guys in a pile of rubbish today, hoping someone recognizes them or maybe just wants to give them a home. If you do, here's my email, and my messages are open." He hoped the pictures would reach the right audience. Craig closed his laptop, feeling lighter than he had that morning. There was something deeply right about saving a life, even 5 small ones. He slept well, already anticipating the next day, imagining a queue of kindly families waiting to adopt the lucky survivors. But the internet, as always, had its own surprises waiting. Craig logged onto his computer and was astonished by the influx of messages. He drank his coffee and readied to respond to inquiries from Facebook users. However, instead of offers with good homes for the puppies, the comments he got were quite strange. In the sea of compliments and awes, a keen-eyed user pointed out that there was something odd about the puppies. She mentioned she wasn't exactly sure what was amiss, but that their snouts were too pointed to be regular dogs, and that she would return after a bit of research. Craig had also had a fleeting thought along those lines at first, but pushed it away, prioritizing the puppy's safety first. Messages following hers agreed. The Facebook post had exploded, and people started to speculate what the puppies could be. Most of these speculations were beginning to run off course. There were a lot of memes about the puppies, until Craig found speculations that were not entirely ridiculous. Users pointed out that the puppies' ears were too round, their paws oddly dexterous, and their tails longer than those of any puppy they had ever seen. Drinking more of his coffee, Craig studied the pictures again, noting that their tails were truly almost the length of their entire bodies. He concluded that they might be some kind of rodent if they ended up not being puppies. "Raccoons?" he asked aloud, entertaining the comments with a nervous cough. He reached his phone to call Bessie, and she answered after one ring. "About the puppies?" she asked. "About the puppies," Craig said in response. "Are you seeing the comments?" "I've been glued to my screen all morning. Also got a message from an animal expert on Facebook," she said. "He's sure we picked up baby foxes." Craig blinked in surprise, laughing to himself. Of course, they were foxes. Foxes that had somehow ended up in a garbage dump in the middle of Liverpool. And here he was, scared that they had somehow snagged baby raccoons. Bessie told him that the expert, Martin Hemington, the founder of the National Fox Welfare Society, advised that they needed to return the foxes to where they had picked them from. They could only hope that the mom returned to feed them. "Yeah, I think that's a great idea too," he said. "But there's a problem." The rubbish pile containing the fox's den had been cleared during the cleanup, and there was no way to put them back there, especially when the mattress that had been their nest was now non-existent. They had to seek the assistance of the National Fox Welfare Society. "Oh, that's not good. I think I'll page Martin and see if there's anything he can do," Bessie replied. They talked about the puppies, foxes, for a while before she ended the call, promising to send an update. An hour later, Bessie called back to tell him about the progress she had made. Martin Hemington was out of the country at the time and would not be able to help efficiently. However, he contacted the local animal rescue and got hold of one that specialized in helping foxes. Paul McDonald was a local rescuer, was called in by Martin to help with their dilemma, and he was more than happy to help. He arrived with a calm and positive energy that immediately put them at ease. He met Bessie and Craig in a coffee shop and wasted no time looking at the pictures that had also reached his Facebook feed. "Fox cubs don't look like foxes when they're young," he explained as he looked at the pictures on Craig's phone. "It's common to mistake them for puppies. It happens all the time." He also explained that vixens usually leave their cubs in the den while they forage. The cubs naturally explored their surroundings as they grew and became less dependent. They needed to find the mother fox as soon as the cubs were too young to survive without her, and it was their priority. The cubs, as he was pleased to hear, were tired and hungry after the long night at the vet, and Paul made sure to keep it that way. He planned to put them in the same place that they had been found and left them to cry out. They all knew that the mother fox would be looking for them and would check the last place she had left them. After their discussion, they got in Bessie's truck and drove to the clinic to pick up the cubs. The vet had also figured out what was amiss with the puppies and was relieved when they explained they now had professional help. The group arrived at the former dumping site around 4 in the evening, and while the den was gone, Paul was sure a secondary den would be near. They put the cubs in a cardboard box with another hot water bottle to keep them warm before leaving them and watching behind cars. It was a tense waiting game, and it seemed to take an eternity for an hour to pass. "Are you sure she'll come back?" Bessie asked quietly, stretching from her hiding place. Craig's joints were also beginning to ache, and he lowered himself into a sitting position, not minding the death. "It's going to take a while," Paul murmured, "but the time will come soon." When it did, Craig was the first to catch a glimpse of the slinky mother fox coming to investigate the box on the ground. He almost scoffed in surprise, but caught himself, remaining silent. The cub's faint cries had increased, and the vixen could not ignore them. She prowled around the box for a while, her snout twitching with apprehension, before dipping her head in it and pulling out a cub with their scruff between her teeth. She took the cub away, and after a few minutes of waiting, Craig, in a whisper, asked Paul what had happened. "They're fine," Paul whispered back. "The mother fox would probably wait until it gets dark before she moves them all." It was possible she did not feel safe trying to move them in the open. Sure enough, the vixen returned once the sun had gone down to retrieve another cub. And then another. And then another, until they were all back where they belonged. By 7 in the evening, she had successfully moved all her cubs. Craig was still in utter disbelief as they emerged from their hiding places. He looked into the cardboard box, only finding the strips and the water bottle. The vixen had truly taken her cubs. Paul McDonald shared a picture of the empty box on Facebook, saying he was pleased with how the situation turned out, and he had explained the entire thing to Craig and Bessie. It would have been a tragedy for the cubs to have been brought up without their mother, and for the mother to lose all of her cubs. It had been the best kind of rescue in his line of work, when nature was allowed to take its own course, and Craig was only relieved he had shared those pictures. It had all ended in the best possible way. Weeks later, the lot was clean, truly clean, and Craig could tell as the gravel of the path crunched under his trainers. This stretch, once an embarrassing and oozing sight from his kitchen window, was now the highlight of Craig's morning run. The air was cool, and he could take deep breaths without gagging. It carried the scent of damp soil and cut grass, which was by far better than the decaying smell that had made the neighborhood organize the cleanup that made him stumble against the foxes. He slowed his pace, not from tiredness, but to take it all in. As the sunlight filtered through the trees at the edge of the lot, Craig found his eyes automatically scanning the margins, the dense thicket of shrubs, and their dark spaces. He hadn't seen the mother fox since she took her cubs away, and he often wondered where they would be hiding. He knew they were out there, possibly somewhere in the tangled, hidden spaces of the city, with the mother fox struggling to raise her 5 cubs, teaching them to hunt, to hide, to survive. Or perhaps they were just hidden in plain sight. Craig now saw dumping sites for more than they were. He'd become an amateur naturalist without meaning to. He noticed the subtle, musky scent on the evening air when the wind was right, and called Paul MacDonald whenever he found an animal that was far from its usual habitat. The sound of quick, light footsteps shattered the trance he had found himself in. Bessie fell into stride beside him, her cheeks flushed with the effort of catching up. "You and this path," she said, her breath coming in almost labored puffs. "I've been calling after you for over 5 minutes." Sorry," Craig admitted as he took off one of his earphones. They slowed to a walk, stopping at the very spot where the mattress had been. It was now just a patch of young, vibrant clover. "That was such a crazy morning." Bessie followed his gaze. And the day that followed was even crazier. No, it was insane. "It really was, huh?" He paused, the old guilt and wonder surfacing together. "For a few hours I was so certain. I thought I was saving those helpless little puppies from a rubbish tip." He had even imagined the family thanking him as they reunited with their puppies or adopted them. He was such a fool. Bessie was quiet for a moment, letting his words settle. "You're looking at it backwards, Craig," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She told him he had only seen something vulnerable and in need, and wanting to fix that was heroic in itself. He had also ended up spreading awareness and learning more about baby animals than he ever thought he would. Yeah, he replied, rubbing the back of his head and refusing to admit he was flustered. She had been wonderful as well. Her quick thinking and being able to contact Martin Hemington had saved those cubs. They stood in a comfortable silence, the morning growing warmer around them. He didn't tell her how much he had needed her words before nudging her with his shoulder. "Come on," Craig said, his voice lighter. "One more lap for a proper cool-down." As they turned to jog back towards their houses, he glanced over his shoulder one last time at the former dumping ground and grinned when a flash of red and brown darted from a burrow into one of the nearby bushes.